What I wanted to do is just give basically a very personal perspective on the relationship between academia and field archaeology from the basis of an archaeological department, Durham, who has its own commercial units operating within it. I want to have a look at some of the pros, some of the cons. I'm being very aware this is all being videotaped, so I'm not too controversial. And also think about some of the things we were talking about before lunch, actually how a unit which is generating data, which is generating material, how that research can be promoted and developed and used in a wider research context. So some of my talk is about very specific aspects of that having in-house units, but also I'm touching on more generally some of these bigger issues about how do we capitalise on the research dividend which is being created out of the massive increase in commercial archaeology over the last 2 years. Well, first of all, just think about the context. There is a long tradition of commercial archaeology units being based within academic departments of archaeology. Not all these units started off as commercial, but particularly with the rise of PPG-16 in the early 90s, the pressure to generate revenue, more and more university archaeology departments, particularly in the 90s, acquired commercially contracting archaeological arms. And obviously the judges flagged out some which are still with us. Here, so you've got Cambridge, so you're hearing people like Leicester, Archaeology South East, Archaeological Services, Durham University. And these, most of them are fairly typical commercial units. They are generating the vast majority of their income through contracting out commercially to carry out developer-funded archaeology, but not entirely. Having said that, there are also quite a few universities which used to have their own commercial arms, which have now disappeared or been taken out of their academic context. So obviously Guard and Arcus have disappeared, Trent and Peak are now no longer part of Nottingham, obviously the Lancaster University is now Archaeology North. So there's, like any sector of commercial archaeology, it's one where new units are appearing, old ones have disappeared. But there are, I think there's certain perhaps common aspects which they all have. And I think perhaps we might be entering periods where we're going to start seeing universities trying to get more engaged back in with the commercial world, and for various reasons I'll talk about in a minute. So, Durham, we have our Archaeological Services, Durham University, and they are part of the archaeology department. So they're on our mailing list. So when I send an email around to all the departmental staff, it will go around to all the archaeology unit people. They are financially part of the department. They are a fairly typical mid-sized commercial unit. We were founded in 1993, so 20 years old, so a good track record, and they do a wide range of typical commercial jobs. There's building recording, the whole gamut of development control work, from desk-based assessments all the way through to full-blown excavation. We have a very strong arm in geophysics, so we do a lot of subcontracting out with geophysics, so we have people working all over the country doing that. Again, a lot of environmental work, a lot of artefact conservation. So some fairly bog standard stuff, and then some more niche, more specialist skills in-house as well. And currently there are around 30 core staff, and of course that staff level fluctuates according to how much work is being done. And until really the last 6 months, we were all together in one building, academic staff alongside members of Archaeological Services. So we actually, not only were we institutionally connected, there's actually a very physical reality of having a commercial unit operating literally next door to members of staff. So they had that. So until recently, there was a very physical sense of partnership between the two. I mean, really, there are perhaps 4 main ways in which the academic side of the department, by which I mean those of us who are working as lecturers or postdoctoral researchers, and of course the students, interact or relate to our units. First of all, there is this issue of developing and capitalising on the commercial field that they do. Like all units, Archaeological Services produces lots and lots of great literature. And one of the ways in which we engage with commercial units is through using that great literature within our own research. I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Also, Archaeological Services provide very important very important field support to us as academic researchers. They're very important in training and teaching, and also increasingly with the impact agenda, Archaeological Services form a key plank of both the impact work we do within the very narrow terms of impacts as understood by the REF process, but also more generally in that wider community outreach and community engagement. So, what do they do in terms of supporting academic research? Well, I think most importantly, Archaeological Services brings to the Department of Archaeology in Durham two things: expertise and equipment. And I think you can't separate the two. So all our geophysical equipment, all our survey equipment is all essentially owned and administered by Archaeological Services. And crucially, they have the field team, they have the people with experience in using the equipment. Now, of course, across the department, most members of staff can use geophysical equipment, can use lots of its stuff. There's a big difference I found in my research between being able to know how to do it and being able to know how to do it quickly and efficiently and getting a useful research product out at the end of it. So I've carried out various geophysical survey projects with first year students, and I normally have to go back and get it done again so I can actually see the data. I can do things myself. I can go out with PhD students and do a geophysical survey. But if I get Archaeological Services to do it, they will go out and do it quickly, effectively, efficiently, and far, far better than I do, because they do that all the time. They have that extensive experience in creating the data, capturing the data, processing it, and interpreting it. And when I'm talking about geophysical survey, that applies to building recording, that applies to excavation. These are people who are excavating most of the time. I dabble in the summer. I spend a couple of months every summer digging. I'm not doing it all the time. I don't have that embedded, solid, experience of physically going to dig. I don't have that myself. And in a practical way, the archaeology unit acts essentially as departmental technicians in some senses. They come in, they provide that technical support. So, major projects they've been involved with within the department. Obviously, Roman Leciester, that's the project I'm doing, so they've been running, we use it as our field school for students, I'll talk a bit more about that in a sec, but they run the project on a day-to-day basis. We've had staff going out to Duncan Hale, our head of geophysics, out in Nepal at the birthplace of Buddha. Oh, that trumps Richard III, Buddha. We haven't found this great yet, no. So going out, carrying out major projects, we've got other things going on. But because they are commercial units, we have to, if we want to use them, we want to utilise them, I can't just turn up to our head of Archaeological Services and say, can I have some geophysics done? If you have a commercial unit within the department, it does actually put you on a commercial relationship with those people who want to do the work. So if I want to do, so big things like this is funded through grant bodies. So it does change that relationship between the researchers and the people doing the day-to-day data acquisition. On the plus side, when you get that kind of research money, it keeps all that money in the department. It means we're not contracting out to external contractors to do our geophysics or to do our artefact conservation. So there are pros and cons with that kind of relationship. Training and teaching, and I think this is perhaps the most underrated aspect of having an archaeological unit within the department. There have been endless debates over the last 5-10 years about how we prepare students for a career in field archaeology, how universities meet that challenge. And it is undoubtedly a very, very difficult challenge. I think it's an impossible challenge. I don't think you can prepare somebody for a career in field archaeology when they've got the total of, after 3 years at university, maybe 6-7 weeks on site. Now, of course, that is, nothing can prepare you from the reality of going from a research excavation to digging on a motorway service station site, digging Bronze Age field systems, or digging road widening or endless watching briefs. You can't prepare people in that sense. But what you can do with your commercial organisation is make sure that when you're training students in field archaeology, they are actually being trained in the archaeological recording techniques and archaeological approaches that are actually used by people outside your university. I went to a large university in the north of England a long time ago. when I learned to excavate, I learned how you should always put your pottery in brown paper bags. I learned that most sites don't seem to have contact sheets. I learned all sorts of things about how not to excavate a site. At least when our students come out of Durham, those who want to go into field archaeology, they would have spent their initial training excavation on a project. Yes, it's a research project, it's not a commercial project, a project which actually has modern recording techniques where they're being supervised by people who spend their lives as archaeological supervisors and archaeological project officers. So it means we don't have to have our students being trained by second years. I know certainly, I'm not sure it's like nowadays, but again, when I was learning, you would be supervised by someone who was all of 8 months older than you and had all of 3 weeks more excavation experience than you did. So we have a professionalisation of that training process. And again, we can't teach people what it's like to do a watching brief in the pouring rain. And that's probably a very good way of putting people off archaeological fieldwork. But at least having a commercial unit means they are exposed to both the technical side, the methodology part. What I'm increasingly realising is very important is they're actually exposed to people who work in commercial archaeology. They sit and they chat over lunch, they talk to our guys, they get a sense of what being a commercial field archaeologist actually involves. Now that probably puts some of them off entirely, some thinking actually this is not a career I want to do. But equally it provides others with a real sense of actually some sense of the kind of things commercial archaeology fieldworkers do. So we have quite a reasonable number of our students going on into commercial field archaeology, either getting experience working with Archaeological Services or going on to local units, because our local units know that Durham students have a reasonable level of field experience. They're not perfect by a long way, God no, but at least they have a sense of what ought to be done. I think that's incredibly important. The commercial Archaeological Services is also really, really important in supporting the amount of impact and community work. Universities are very bad at the moment about conceptualising impact within the very, very narrow terms of the research excellence framework for universities, which has a very, very limited way of defining impact. So the vast majority of community work and outreach and dissemination that we all do as archaeologists does not count as referable impact. It's got to be, you've got to show step change, you've got to show change, you've got to be able to measure it, you've got to show that kind of thing. But I still think we need as a university to be committed to that wider engagement with local communities, with the general public, and that's always been very important for us. And certainly, virtually, we work with Archaeological Services in two ways to deliver that. First of all, primarily through the Leciester Field project, we have a large project which has been running for 2 months every summer for 6 years, which has had 40 or 50 members of the local community on site every day working with us. We've got some members of the local community who've actually got more field experience than some of the junior members of Archaeological Services themselves, because they spend so much time working on our community projects. So we've got the community stuff which is being pushed out and developed and run by the university itself, but also we work through contracting out to HLF funded projects, so providing geophysical support for all the various community projects, local projects you get, providing supervisors, providing training, normally on a very low or non-existent marginal profit basis, but purely just covering expenses. So that's very important for us as well. And again, that gives our students an opportunity to go work on community excavations. It provides more opportunities for our students to go out. So this is our free-range chicken farm stroke archaeological excavation, which is that's taken last week up at Frosterley, top end of Weardale, where excavating was probably an Anglo-Saxon church, or certainly a church with Anglo-Saxon elements in it. And we had a combination of local volunteers, our university students and school kids all coming on, working together on a project which we were running jointly with the North Pennines AONB. And the North Pennines AONB get something out of it, they get the work done, they get the community out there, we get the engagement with the community. It means we have Archaeological Services, a staff who are very, very used to going out and talking to people and engaging with people. Of course, like any place, there are some people I would not let anywhere near the members of the public, and that goes to the people on the academic side as well as on the commercial side. But generally speaking, we're very used to dealing with people, have an understanding of what it's like to be a volunteer, and know what questions people are likely to ask. So that's an incredibly important part of the work we do. And one of the things I'll come back to is this stuff isn't purely kind of instrumental community engagement stuff. It's also producing very important research stuff as well. We're getting lots of very important information out of it as well. Now, how we can go on to use that, how we can kind of articulate that research material is perhaps a slightly different matter. I want to have a quick think now about some of the ways in which we have tried to capitalise on the huge amount of research, or huge amount of data. It's not research, for someone's actually done something with it. But a huge amount of data which is coming out of the excavations we're doing. Well, first of all, like any commercial unit, there are those flagship projects which have a high profile. So something we've done, we just published, just came out earlier on this year, one of the most northerly Roman villas in Roman Britain, so up on the banks of the River Tees. It was a commercial excavation discovered during building the housing estate. Finds this lovely little Roman villa, comes out as a traditional monograph written by Archaeological Services staff, all very nice. Of course, most of the publication and full research was funded by English Heritage because of the importance of the site. Because the developers only funded the initial analysis stage. But we are able to kind of bring this out and get our great big publication out. It's all very, very exciting. We've also been able to get that research material, again, through the good offices of funding through English Heritage. We have our Ingleby Barrett page on the ADS stuff. There's data, there's various downloads, all ticking all those buttons we're meant to do to make material accessible. So in some ways, that's the kind of thing any unit could do if English Heritage decides to get the checkbook out. We also found that we've been able to use that material and feed it through into research being done by academic staff. So my specialist area of study is late Roman into early medieval. So it's quite handy that they excavated a Roman villa which went from the late Roman into the early medieval. So I've been able to incorporate that material into stuff I've done myself. So this is a recent European Journal of Archaeology article which came out. So we're kind of channeling the research value both out in terms of it's the primary publication, but also ensuring that within the university we are reworking that data and pushing it out in other avenues and putting it into places where people may not normally see it, particularly people working on the wider European world. We also publish regularly and extensively within the local journals. Obviously, as one of the big flagship sites, we produce we dig a lot of bread and butter sites which are interesting, have something worth looking at, published, but are not full monograph material. At the moment, wind farms, there's an interesting correlation between wind farms and Iron Age enclosures in County Durham, probably involving windy hilltops. But you more or less, we've been churning out lots and lots of publications, lots and lots of small excavations uncovering late Iron Age into Roman enclosures. That's great. We want to get them out there, we want to publish them. We have our local journals, Durham Archaeological Journal, Archaeologia Eliana, which is for Northumberland primarily. These are great. Every issue, if you go back over the last, say, 10 years, every volume of these two journals has site reports from Archaeological Services. But there is essentially a bottleneck. There is not enough places to place our articles. We could publish twice as many journal articles as we do. Understandably, Archaeologia Eliana do not want to turn themselves into the house journal of Archaeological Services, and neither do Durham Archaeological Journal. There are other people in the county doing archaeological work who want to get it published. So this is one of the problems we've had in getting our material out there, is the fact we do not have enough places within which to put our material. There might be options, ways of thinking about how you tackle that, maybe through just more or less releasing the unedited versions of the grey literature, but it's nice to do something more than that. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are not specialist archaeologists, still want to read this material, and people who belong to the local archaeology societies would be interested in seeing our stuff, but it does need to be topped and tailed for perhaps a wider public consumption. We don't want to give them lots and lots of raw data. I know you lot all love raw data, but and this comes to the second problem with archaeological journals. They do not want to publish large quantities of data tables. These are run by local societies. They don't necessarily have web archives where you can put large quantities of data. Increasingly, we are being asked to reduce the size of the publications, the size of the chapters, get rid of all that boring specialist data. Do we need to see a list of all that Roman pottery? You know, Phil grimacing there. But those are the kind of pressures we're getting, because these are ultimately journals being published for the local community and the members of society. These are not, you know, primarily to get out detailed archaeological data. We tend to forget that. The role of archaeology, local archaeology societies, is actually not for people like us. It's for the wider membership, and we, as a former editor of DAJ, I've had complaints saying, why do I have to wade through all these data tables? And you realise actually there's only maybe 10 people in the country who are going to want to look at those data tables. So why do you publish them in small journals of archaeology? So that's a big problem. It's bread and butter science. Even more of a problem are those projects which frankly produce very little. Maybe produce a 2-metre stretch of Roman ditch, half a couple of flints, that kind of stuff. Stuff which individually has, to be crude, no interest and no value, but cumulatively has group value. And that's another problem, is how do we deal with that? How do we pull that together? We're already struggling to get the sites which are worth publishing out there. How do we tackle this kind of group material? A good example is we've been doing loads of work over the last 20 years within the World Heritage Site of Durham, the cathedral and the castle and the whole peninsula. Now, a lot of that is really quite exciting archaeology, but there are lots of tiny little observations, there are lots of things where actually we haven't found anything at all, but which all that negative data is of value. And how do we go about getting that material out there when we're already struggling for ways in which to disseminate our material? We try to think about ways in which we can approach this. And I should say, this is what I'm going to present using an ideal. This is an ideal world, but I'm going to tell you at the end why it's really hard to actually do this in practice. To try and develop that material, we tried to build and enhance the existing research resources we had, try and create protocols to ensure that we maximise the research potential of the work we're actually doing, trying to look at long-term projects which can bring in partners, so everything's not reliant on the Archaeological Services and the academic department, and try and develop a research culture. Now, these are all things which are much, much easier said than done. One of the things we found within the North East is there is a huge amount of existing resources which haven't been published, haven't got out there, and that our tiny little boring sites can contribute to. And a lot of the stuff here was actually stuff which was carried out as part of the regional research framework process, where we actually did an audit, more or less effectively, of just physically what's out there, physically what sites being done. Because of course we don't know the value of the sites we're digging until you put them into context. And this is the problem, and again, it's something which you know, CIfA, which we've been struggling with for years, is how you get that research, how you develop that research importance of all the little commercial excavations you do. And this idea of focusing on group value of sites is, I think we found incredibly important. But you need someone who can sit down there and wade through the 400, 500 project reports which have been produced over the last 10 years, and actually wade through them and actually say, God, this looks really boring, but there are 3 Mesolithic flints here, someone will be interested. And actually collating all those things, and actually having a sense of having someone who knows the importance of those piddly little flint reports, but is able to bring it all together. We started trying to audit, see what funding was available for developing these resources, trying to move away perhaps from straight publications, monographs, or as journal articles, and try and think about other ways of disseminating the data. And of course, things like the OASIS project and the fact that most grey literature should be digitised and sent out very, very quickly now, that's great. But my problem with that is all very well producing grey literature, which is used by academics, but it doesn't necessarily reach out to the wider community. And at the end of the day, we've got this basic problem that a grey literature site report is not an academic piece of work. A grey literature commercial site report is done to meet a planning demand. And you can guarantee that people in the planning department and developers are not going, oh look, it's got some Barbertine pottery, how incredibly exciting. They don't care, they just think, great, I can build my house now. So you've got this problem where the grey literature is not trying to be a research document. It's not intended to be a research document. It's intended to be a ticking of a box. Ideally, we can try and publish nationally and internationally, but again, it's a great idea in theory, but it's very, very hard to actually kind of put forward and develop in practice. Now, again, we've got the ideas of trying to develop ways of thinking about the research, and we prove the research agendas. We should be thinking about the research value, the research importance of the little excavations we do, even before the very, very early project planning stage. To be honest, I suspect people have always done this. I don't think people weren't thinking about it. I'm not entirely convinced people are actually necessarily doing it any more than they were previously. I do wonder, I went through a whole series of kind of grey literature reports from our region to see how many of them were referring to the research agendas. And the good news is that loads of them were referring to the research agendas. Again, how much of that was a box-ticking exercise, I don't know. Of course, no one's going to admit that to you. No one's going to say, David, I took your lovely research agenda and I just used it as a box-ticking exercise. But I think there are sites who've been able to realise there's a potential importance, get specialists on board, speak to people within the department who might be interested. Just physically, for example, in Durham, if you've got an interesting Roman site, get some of the Roman lecturers to come out and have a look at it. Remind them what real archaeology actually looks like. Same with early medieval sites. It's quite nice actually to be able to go out and actually look at some early medieval archaeology when it's still in the ground, rather than when it's in a plastic bag back in the department. So there are scopes for, at the very, very early stages of the project, and this happened in Mubarak, where it's clear it's very, very important right from the get-go. We were able to actually start getting people in place to think about those projects and think about the importance, and then bring in the academics later on down the line as well. So people like myself and Steve Willis at the University of Kent all had contributions in that big project monograph. So we were able to get people on board with that fairly quickly. Also, something we're trying to do, and it's not, I'm not sure we're terribly successful at that yet at the moment, is trying to build things more collaboratively, try moving away from looking at site-based stuff, try and take this model of group value, but also just bundling stuff together in a fairly loose and informal way. For example, if we look at the Roman archaeology of County Durham, the last couple of years we've seen some big PPG 16 projects. I know we've done a lot of PPG 16 now, but Ingleby Barrack and Favordale, another small Roman villa site, they all came up in the world of PPG 16. We've seen some really interesting new sites coming up in the context of community projects. So Winchester, East Park, Sedgefield, a very mad and strange Roman sites up near Durham. That's bringing out Roman archaeology. We're getting academic research projects. There's been work with people like Richard Tingley been doing at Piersbridge. There's backlog projects. There's a whole series of stuff all happening. PAS data, a lot of PAS material coming up at County Durham, where there's already, if you put it together, a loose coalition of people who are doing interesting work, looking at the same area, may not have a formal organisation, but we're starting to be able to, this is very slow work, share data, exchange data, and actually try and work a little bit more collaboratively, which again is kind of axiomatic. Of course we should be working collaboratively, but we all know it's a lot easier said than actually done. So with Roman Durham, we are starting to make progress in the department on actually pulling together a range of different data from a range of different sources and actually start reworking the kind of things we're doing. And finally, the wider development of a research culture. First of all, Archaeological Services is filled with people who work in archaeology. They are interested in archaeology. We don't have a divide between the department, between the people who dig it up and the people who are interested in it. There are people working in commercial archaeology, most people work in commercial archaeology, because they want to be archaeologists, because they're interested in stuff. So it's trying to capitalise on that, find out where there are people within the unit who do have research interests, using things like CPD, or just, if there's a spare afternoon, getting them to work on a project. We've had people take individual projects, people working as project officers, going through the backlogs, picking stuff up, and actually saying, oh, this is good, I want to run with that. I'll do it myself, I'll take it and push things forward. Improving general communications, realising there's an immense amount of expertise within commercial units, and one of the things I'm very opposed to is sometimes an idea when we talk about things like knowledge transfer. and when more generally when we talk about grey literature, it's very easy to fall into the idea that there's always people making data, and then the academics will kind of step forward and go, all right, step back, I'm going to tell you what it means. Most of the time, the people in the units know perfectly well what it means, or have the ability to find out what it means. There are certain areas in the discipline, particularly pottery, small finds, where there are more people with more expertise working in the commercial world than there are within academia. So that knowledge transfer can go both ways. So it's important to think of ways in which you can capture that. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Obviously, developers often won't pay for basic post-text analysis or full post-text publication. So even before we get to a stage of having a decent grey lit report, it's actually getting to stuff where we can actually say something about that material at all. Even when people say, I will take this and I will analyse it as a side project or do it for free, there still often needs financial support. We've got somebody with Archaeological Services who's looking at a little Anglo-Saxon cemetery done a couple of years ago. They're willing to do all the work themselves. We've got students do the bone, but we need money to pay for the artefact conservation. We can't do that without some kind of financial input. So there are these micro barriers within the process, stopping people where the will is there and the interest is there, there's little practical things that we can't do. There are, in theory, lots of funding around. I keep on getting emails saying, look at this knowledge transfer money, look at all this money available to share and work with the commercial world. Things like collaborative knowledge transfers, collaborative PhDs. Now we have, like many other university departments, our problem is our commercial unit is internal and we can't get money to collaborate with ourselves. I want to get money to collaborate with Archaeological Services to produce things. It's probably easier for me to get money to collaborate with MOLAS than it is for me to collaborate with people within my own department, which is stupid, basically. And more generally, within the cultural heritage world, in the historic environment world, we don't have money. No one's got no money. If you want to do knowledge transfer, the partner organisation has to pay half the wages. If you want to do a collaborative PhD, you still need to dob in £1,000 a year. People just don't have that kind of money. Equally, research funding is under pressure. There are great projects like Roman Royal Settlement projects, I think you've heard about, but there's a lack of middle-sized projects. The really big picture stuff, there's lack of smaller regional projects who, because they're less exciting, in inverted commas, will find it harder to get academic funding. And finally, this is one of the really big problems, this is where I'll finish, is finding someone to take ownership of these projects. I'm in one of the biggest archaeology departments in the country. There are about 2 of us working on archaeology within our region. We already have existing research interests. I can only apply for 1 AHRC grant at a time. So it's very hard for me to say, right, I'm going to do this worthy, but perhaps not as interesting as me personally project. It's very, very hard to find someone who will take ownership of actually using this material. It doesn't necessarily have to be an academic, it might be a student, undergraduates, but I'm having to struggle with students who are choosing their dissertations, one member of staff saying, come and do my wonderful undergraduate dissertation about pyramids. And me saying, come do my dissertation on the cesspits of County Durham. It's very hard to sell. Ultimately, it's more interesting, but it's very hard to sell people. And this is our problem. We've got loads of projects to do, loads of things that people could do. It's just getting people to step up and actually do it. And I'm not sure what the answer is for that. Okay, thank you very much.